Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back. Brandon again. And I get asked all the time about buttwink, what it is, how to avoid it, all sorts of things, especially on my own squat videos, but also on other videos that I see that people are squatting because you know I'm all about that booty. But because of this, and I also like to highlight other YouTube channels, I figured I'd kill two birds with one stone and introduce you guys to Chris Duffin, because in the past when people have asked me about buttwink, I've usually pointed them towards this particular video because Chris does a great job explaining it, talking about a lot of different things regarding it, and giving some ways to actually help improve or eliminate it. So I'm going to go ahead and show you this, but as part of that, please definitely go ahead and subscribe to Chris's channel if you're interested. He's got a lot of great information. I've learned a lot from him myself. He also has a website, kabukiwarrior.com, where he talks about things that's happened to him in his life, and it's a really interesting read if you have the time. And oh, by the way, he also holds the world record in squats at 880 pounds, weighing only 220. That's raw with wraps, so it is legit. And he also deadlifts 900 pounds, if you happen to care, which I think is very impressive considering he competes in the same weight class as me, but I can't actually say that I compete with that. So go check out Chris's channel, let him know I sent you, and let's get on to the video.
We rolling? Back on track. Another overly caffeinated journey with Chris Duffin at Elite Performance today. And we're going to talk about, well, not talk about, we're just going to see what kind of comes out of my mouth in regards to buttwink, or as we like to call it, lumbar flexion. We're going to talk about why it's important, how to reduce or eliminate it, and also how to incorporate your knowledge of what you learned today into your training. So first piece, buttwink, lumbar flexion. That's when our lumbar spine here pulls under and rounds out. I might not be a very good example. Daniel, this is a good time for you. Okay. Nice deep squat. All right, come on, all the way. There we go. You see this starting to round out down here? I know you can do a better job of being worse, but that's fine. That's a good example. So it's important for a couple reasons. One, we're putting our spine at risk. Not a good thing when you've got a lot of weight on your back. So we want to basically reduce or eliminate that wherever possible. And I see some people out there saying, well, such and such 800-pound squatter has some. I shouldn't worry about it. There's a little bit of validity to that argument, but not so much. So a couple things. Let's say an 800-pound squatter, look at them. They've got a massive trunk. That's going to be able to stabilize them and control them a lot better if they get into a near load failure or out of balance, any of those things. So it's going to help protect them over somebody that's, let's say, has been squatting for less than 10 years. I say 10 years because you're not going to be an 800-pound squatter if you haven't been squatting that long. So this is of particular importance for new lifters, which also happen to be generally the crowd that is really loving the concept of ATG squats. Or I don't know if it's ass to grass or ass to ground, whichever it is, but basically squatting down to here. Now, in fact, I've never actually seen anybody squat like that in the gym, but online that's where everybody squats too, according to what they write. So, to get into that position usually involves a lot of buttwink or lumbar flexion, puts us in a lot of dangerous load condition, and I don't believe any new athlete, particularly any adolescent athletes, anybody that's not over 250 pounds and been training for 10 years should be squatting to for any reason. So we're going to talk about why. One, again, if you get out of balance or you're at near load, you're at high risk for back injury. Two, so if you don't buy that argument, I'm not going to hurt myself, whatever, you're leaving gains on the table. So there's a couple things that can happen, or not happen, but it's a clear indicator of if you have some buttwink. Again, some level of flexion is tolerable, and we'll go through some examples of that here in a little bit. But there's a couple things, and it comes down to how do we control buttwink or spinal flexion. There's two primary things that we need to do. First, you need to go watch my video on abdominal bracing and breathing. So very important. That's number one, is being able to control in this spinal area. Daniel, am I still in the image here? Yes. Okay. So we want to pressurize properly. I'm not going to go into depth in through it, but this, we're going to push out on our obliques. We're going to pressurize. We're going to breathe diaphragmatically. We're going to push that diaphragm down, out, pressurize all this. This It's a nice, tight, rigid core. That's number one way of controlling. This is where a lot of that control from. It's not massive erectors. Obviously, those are important. But this defines a lot of what we do for controlling that. Number two is activating the glutes. So those two things are what really controls your hip rotation. So if you lock that in as you squat, that's what's going to control and keep that rigid, those two things. So if you're having butt wink, it means you're relaxing in one of those two areas, and you need to fix it because you're not getting optimum glute firing. You're compromising your core, so you're likely going to come over. There's certain things that are going to happen. So if you've got it, it's an indicator that you're not doing something optimally. Now, you can be having some butt wink just based due to the structure of your joints and the depth that you're squatting, a whole lot of things. So we're going to talk about how do you control that, and how do you incorporate that into your training. So number two, the first two things you need to focus on is one, pressurizing properly, bracing properly, glute activation. You can watch my glute activation warm-up video. So that is a really great tool to deal with. Hip mobility also comes into play. There's arguments that maybe it doesn't. I say it does, but indirectly. It's what you do with it. If I'm doing medium to close stance squat because that's what my hip mobility allows, and I try to stay erect, I'm going to fall over backwards if this comes out. I don't think I'm going to use that as an example, but I think you can see if we yank this out, I'm going to fall over. So typically, you end up more in this position, either forward. Now see, we're losing some mobility in this hip, both from my upper back and from my hips. And actually the hip depth, if you'll notice, I've actually got to go deeper. So there's a lot more requirement on this joint to have a higher level of flexibility with this medium narrow stance. So if I improve my hip mobility, I can get into what you see in a lot of my squat videos, where I can sit more between the hips. Requires a lot more glute activation, requires you to have hip mobility to get in here. And now, you can see I've done this same squat. I'm not losing as much mobility in this joint. So look at the difference between the angle of the hip to leg to squat to depth versus here. Significantly different. So if you watch my my cheating at squats, Vikings and racism video, you'll hear the discussion on the Scottish hip. And that's what I have. That's why I've developed this, because I have a limited ability for hip movement in that socket. So work around it. So that's how you incorporate that into your training, and how hip mobility can come into play. You always have to be able to squat to where you control this leg position via the balance between the VMO and the glute. So that we're not going valgus. Again, if you go like this, one, it's really bad position to be in, but it puts me back into that position where I need more mobility out of this hip to accomplish the same squat. So if I'm using up that mobility in the hip, then I can end up having that lumbar flexion just as a result of my skeletal structure. So again, hip mobility doesn't directly affect it, but indirectly it allows you to do things differently that will improve that spine position. So how you incorporate this in your training? One, do all the things I've talked about so far. Two, do not squat to a depth that is causing significant lumbar flexion. Don't do it. That's just a practice that we have here at Elite Performance Center, where we limit the depth of people who squat until they're able to incorporate this stuff enough to where they can squat to depth properly. We have a significant reduction in back injuries as a relation to this practice, and also some pretty damn good squatters, if you hadn't noticed, due to this practice. So what's acceptable and what isn't, that's really tough to say from a coach's perspective. There's a lot of that you just see and you know, but we'll see if we can give some examples. Daniel, come back out here again. So hopefully we can see this okay on the video. Go ahead and stand to the side. And I'm going to have you go down, and we'll talk about what's good and what isn't. So we've got our spine position. Go ahead and brace your abs properly. Squeeze those glutes. All right, let's squat in and down. Nice and good. Good neutral spine. and starting to break right there. That would be about the limits. This is actually really good for you, Daniel. It's because you're on camera, huh?
Yep.
All right, so now let's go ahead and let it round out a little bit this time so we can give a good example. All right, so this is about the limit of what I would allow here. So roughly around, basically, if you see, go ahead and squat all the way down to full depth, let it round out. Okay, so here's where his maximal is. Come up and right in here. Again, he's probably got about 10% of his usable lumbar flexion here. I'd like to stay under that. That's it. Again, eliminate it if you can. Watch my squats. You'll see that. All right.
All right, we're gonna do the goblet squat. This is a key one for learning how to maintain that lumbar spine position while hitting depth on the squat. And a little bit of hip mobility, but it all ties into the same as our discussion so far. So, we're gonna grab the ground with your feet. So grab it, just like it's your hand. Pretend you can grab it. You want to twist the floor apart. So basically in the hip socket itself, twist. It's gonna fire those glutes. Gonna pressurize obliques. Breathe out, down. Make sure our sternum's locked in, not flared. We're gonna grab our kettlebell up here. You can do this without the kettlebell as well. And we're gonna squat in. Boom. 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 Now the trick is not the repetition here, but the static hold we're gonna do. So we don't wanna go, oh, look how flexible we are. This is bad shit. So how we're gonna fix this is firing all the things that we just talked about. The pressurization, the firing the glutes, which we're doing through twisting. Floor up, okay? We're gonna go in here and we're gonna hold it at the point where we're still maintaining and keep it. And if over time we can work a little bit lower and keep it, and lower and keep it. And this is how we work on developing that. So, you want to do that for time. Watch TV, things like that. Sit in front of the TV, you can practice it. You don't need the kettlebell. Do those things. Okay? Try to hold it 30 to 60 seconds, longer if you can. Work on that position. You want to try to work it, if this is where you stop to start with, that's what we do. We don't compromise. But work lower, but not round out. We don't want to do this crap. Okay? This is what we want to cue. Learn to be able to hold that. All right. All right. So if you want to work on pure hip flexibility, we're going to do the tactical frog. So what we do is we get down here in froggy stance and push our hips apart. Nice and square to my hips right now. I'm going to be up on my hands. I'm on the sticky floor here, so I'm going to go ahead and actually grab and push out with my hands a little bit. You can use sliders in here or a towel on some hardwood. And we're going to get in here and you're going to move back and forth and find some sticky spots. Find the hurts and then relax. Breathe into it. Breathe into it and work through them. Then work it a little bit wider. Again, I'm on the sweaty on the floor, so I'm going to use my hands to open up. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to rotate in the hip joint here, right here. So I'm going to basically take this pocket right here and put it to the ground through rotation. Notice this hip staying the same. Rotate out and in, then the other side. Boom. So you can do that for like sets of 10. Again, work it a little bit. Notice you'll open up a little bit more. Open out. Move back and forth. Find those sticky spots again. And repeat. Rinse and repeat.
Subscribe to my YouTube channel to get additional instructional videos, training videos. Also check out my website, my blog, articles, all good stuff, kabukiwarrior.com.